Welcome! We're discussing The Lean Startup by Ries, published 2011, which has become a seminal work in the field of entrepreneurship. The central thesis is powerful. Entrepreneurship should be treated as a rigorous management discipline, not just a leap of faith. It challenges the traditional notion of a startup as a smaller version of a large company and proposes a fundamentally different approach based on continuous learning and experimentation. Ries argues that entrepreneurs are everywhere and that his methodology can be applied to any organization creating new products or services, even large enterprises and government agencies. A human institution designed to create new products and services under conditions of extreme uncertainty. This definition highlights the inherent ambiguity that startups face and the need for a structured approach to navigate that uncertainty. One of the most insightful aspects of the book is the discussion of the challenges that established companies face when trying to innovate. Traditional structures and processes of large organizations can often hinder innovation and make it difficult to adopt a lean startup approach. The book also acknowledges the potential pitfalls of overly rigid adherence to any methodology, cautioning against the dangers of pseudoscience and the importance of maintaining a flexible and adaptive mindset. Ultimately, the Lean Startup offers a valuable framework for navigating the complexities of innovation in today's fast-paced world. While the book is particularly focused on startups, its strategies and insights extend well beyond, offering useful guidance to any organization striving to create new products or services with greater efficiency and less risk. So let's dive into today's podcast. As always, please share, like, and subscribe.
Hey everyone, buckle up. We're doing a deep dive into the Lean Startup. It's like the ultimate playbook for, well, anyone really, who wants to shake things up with new ideas.
Yeah, and it's not just hype. I mean, it's one of those books, that everyone seems to be talking about. It's definitely hit a nerve. CEOs, big-time venture capitalists, they've all endorsed this book. And for good reason. It's absolutely packed with these really great insights on how to actually build a successful business. And today we're going to be diving deep into its core principles, extracting all those golden nuggets of wisdom that can really help you navigate this crazy, unpredictable world of startups.
And that's really the key word here, isn't it? Uncertainty. You see, traditional business plans, as good as they can be, they often kind of fall short in the face of the unknown. But startups, they thrive in that case. They're tackling those problems that nobody else has figured out yet.
Right. It's kind of like ditching that old dusty playbook and embracing this whole new way of thinking,
Yeah.
which is exactly what the Lean Startup is all about. But it's not just for tech companies, is it? I mean, I wouldn't exactly call my grandma's cookie business a startup.
It's really not about working in a garage or trying to disrupt the world with an app. It's more of a mindset, you see. It's about applying those core principles of lean manufacturing, efficiency, eliminating waste to the unpredictable world of creating something brand new. And even, believe it or not, even a Fortune 500 company can benefit from that.
Okay, so it's bigger than just launching the next big tech thing. Got it. So what are we talking about here? What are the core ideas behind this whole lean startup approach?
Well, the book lays out 5 key principles. First off, entrepreneurs are everywhere. It's not about those fancy job titles. It's about embracing the unknown, building something new, and it doesn't really matter where you are.
I like that. So it's less about wearing the hoodie and more about a way of approaching these challenges you face.
Exactly. And that leads us right into the second principle. Entrepreneurship is management, because startups, they need a different management style, one that really embraces experimentation, embraces learning, not just these rigid planes.
Makes sense. So less stick to the script and more let's just see what works.
Right. Which brings us to the third principle, validated learning. It's about constantly testing your assumptions and using real-world data to kind of steer your business in the right direction.
So less guesswork, more evidence-based decisions. Gotcha.
Totally. And what really caught my eye Even a giant company like Intuit, the TurboTax and QuickBooks folks, they say this lean startup thing really breathed new life into how they come up with new stuff. Which makes you wonder, how can a company with thousands of employees actually use these ideas that seem, well, more for those scrappy little startups?
They're a great example of a company that really used these ideas to create SnapTax, their mobile app.
You see, Intuit, they recognized that mobile was becoming, more and more important, but they didn't just assume that they knew what mobile users wanted. Instead, they actually used a lean startup approach to validate those ideas and ultimately build a successful product.
So it's not about like resting on your laurels, even when you're, a big player, but how do you actually put this whole validated learning thing into practice? I mean, it still sounds kind of theoretical.
Well, that's where the fourth principle comes in. Build, measure, learn.
Build, measure, learn. Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah, it's like the heart of the lean startup, this continuous feedback loop. Basically, you build what we call a minimum viable product, or like an MVP for
An
short.
MVP, gotcha.
Right, an MVP. You get it in front of customers as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Then you measure their response, you learn from it, and then boom, you adapt.
So it all comes down to this idea of validated learning. Ries, the author, he uses this story about IMVU, a company he co-founded, to really show you what he means. They were trying to create this 3D avatar chat platform, like in the metaverse. But what's interesting is they went about it in a way that seemed honestly kind of backward. They launched this product that even they admitted was kind of a mess. It was buggy. And get this, they actually charged people to use it.
Wait, they charge money for a buggy product? That's a bold move.
It was all part of the plan. They were operating under extreme uncertainty. And that's a big part of being a startup, right? Doesn't matter if you're a small team working in your basement or a team inside a huge corporation. If you're making something brand new, there are going to be things you just don't know.
It's like heading into uncharted territory without a map, right?
Yeah, exactly. And those old school business plans, with all the detailed forecasts and deadlines, they just don't cut it. You need a totally different approach, one that's all about validated learning.
Okay, so back to IMVU and this terrible product of theirs. So they put it out there specifically to figure out what customers really wanted, right?
Exactly. They weren't expecting to make a ton of money right away, just a little, mostly from friends and family. But the big thing was they treated every interaction with customers like a report card. They were obsessed with understanding how people actually use the platform, not just what they said they wanted. And what they found out was really interesting. They always thought people wanted avatar chat as an add-on to their existing instant messengers. But it turned out people were perfectly happy with the IM programs they already had. What they actually wanted was a separate, dedicated network just for avatar chat.
Wow, so that's a game changer. Did they have to, totally change their strategy based on that?
Oh, absolutely. They ditched the whole add-on idea and went all in on this standalone IM network for avatars. And get this, they even found that people were using IMVU to make new friends online, something they never even thought of.
So even though their first product wasn't perfect, it gave them incredibly valuable insights that shaped the whole future of their company. That's validated learning in action right there.
It really is. And it highlights this important idea. For a startup, success isn't just about building something. It's about learning how to build a real sustainable business.
Which brings us to this broader point. At its heart, entrepreneurship is about management.
Exactly. It's a new kind of management, one where learning is more important than blindly following a plan. Experimentation over a script, adapting rather than sticking to an outdated roadmap. Take Intuit's SnapTax, for example.
Oh yeah, the app that lets you file your taxes on your phone. Not really what comes to mind when you think of a company like Intuit.
Right. And the SnapTax team, they didn't exactly fit the typical startup image either. They weren't holed up in a garage living on ramen. They had salaries, benefits, all the resources of a big company.
But they were successful because they thought like a startup.
Exactly. They started small, laser-focused on one problem, and they were incredibly quick to change and adapt based on feedback they got from customers. They even started using pictures of W-2 forms that people sent from their cell phones. It was a solution they discovered just by talking to their users.
So even with all those resources, they embraced the whole lean startup thing, and it worked amazingly well.
That's it. It's about fundamentally changing how you think about innovation, whether you're a 5-person team or a company with thousands of employees.
Okay, so let's make this real for our listener. What does this actually mean for them?
No matter what you do, if you're creating something new, the lean startup can help. It's about treating every single part of your project as a hypothesis, something you need to test, not just a box to check off.
Okay, I love that. So we've got validated learning, identifying those hidden assumptions, and always putting learning ahead of those deadlines. But how do we actually create these experiments? Like, where do we even start?
That's where the minimum viable product comes in the MVP. And it's really important to understand an MVP isn't about building something cheap or unfinished. It's about getting the most learning with the least amount of work possible.
So not cutting corners, but being smart about it.
Yeah.
Got it. But I've got to admit, whenever I hear minimum viable product, I picture something pretty bare bones.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. An MVP could be a simple website landing page, or even a super personalized service where you're handling customer requests one-on-one. The key is to focus on testing your riskiest assumptions first.
Okay. Is there an example of an MVP that really surprised you?
Groupon's a classic. They started with a WordPress blog, a handmade coupon for pizza, and an email list. That's it. They didn't even know if people would be into this whole group buying thing.
And from those humble beginnings, a billion-dollar company is born. That's wild. So their MVP wasn't about a fancy platform or their own deals. It was just about seeing if the core idea worked.
Exactly. And because they started so small, they could change things quickly based on real feedback. Like, they learned that people were more into local deals, like a pizza place around the corner versus some discount vacation package miles away.
Makes sense. You're way more likely to check out that new pizza place than to book a flight across the world. So Groupon's MVP let them test their idea really quickly. But how do we even know if an MVP is working? What should we be looking at?
Which brings us to the fifth principle, innovation accounting. It's about shifting your focus. Instead of looking at traditional business stuff like revenue or profit, you're tracking how much you're learning. Traditional accounting, with its forecasts and projections, it can be misleading for startups. You're constantly learning and changing, so those initial guesses are almost always going to be wrong.
So if those old metrics don't apply, how do we even measure progress?
It's all about actionable metrics. These are the numbers that actually help you make decisions. So instead of just counting website visits, maybe you track the percentage of visitors who sign up for a free trial or those who actually become paying customers. Those numbers give you a much clearer picture of how people are using your product and what you might need to tweak.
So less about vanity metrics that make you feel good and more about the data that actually drives growth and learning.
Yeah.
Love it. But what if those metrics tell us our initial idea was way off? What then?
That's when you got to make a tough call. Pivot or persevere. A pivot is like a structured course correction, changing strategy based on what you've learned from those metrics.
So not giving up, but adjusting your sails.
Exactly. Take Votizen, for example. They wanted to get people more involved in civic stuff, and they started with this idea of a social network just for verified voters. But after months of testing and tweaking, they weren't seeing the growth they wanted.
So they pivoted.
Several times, actually. They went from a social network to a platform where, activists could pay to connect with those voters, then to a self-serve platform for anyone. And each pivot was driven by data and feedback, which helped them find a model that actually worked.
Wow. So they didn't let their initial idea blind them. They used each pivot as a stepping stone.
Exactly. And that highlights a core part of this whole lean startup thing. Pivoting isn't failing. It's about being smart and adapting, turning uncertainty into an advantage.
So we've got validated learning, MVPs, innovation accounting, pivoting. Man, that's a lot. But how do you build a company that can actually handle this constant experimentation and change? It seems like it could be chaotic.
That's where small batches come in. It's about taking those big, scary projects and breaking them down into smaller, more manageable pieces.
So instead of Rome in a day, we're talking one brick at a time, testing as we go.
Mm-hmm.
But why are small batches so important?
Small batches help you catch problems early on. You can make adjustments before those small problems become huge headaches. Think about Toyota's andon cord. Any worker on the line can pull it if they see a defect, and it stops the entire production line.
So it's not about being afraid to hit pause. It's about making sure small issues don't snowball. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But how does this work in a fast-paced startup world?
Here's the thing. Imagine you build a new feature and release it all at once. You might not even realize there's a problem until it's in the hands of all your users. But if you release it in small batches, you can get feedback from a smaller group first, make tweaks, then roll it out more broadly.
It's like testing a recipe on a few friends before a big dinner party, right? Get feedback, make changes before it really matters. But with all these small batches, do things slow down?
It seems counterintuitive, but those small batches can actually speed things up. They help you pinpoint bottlenecks, streamline communication basically, create a more agile company.
So it's the tortoise and the hare, huh?
Yeah.
Slow and steady wins the race, especially when we're talking about innovation. But what about, like, product design? I get how it works for manufacturing or software, but design feels different.
It applies there too. Take SGW Design Works. They design custom equipment, and they had to create this specialized mount for a portable X-ray machine for the military. And instead of spending weeks on detailed drawings, they went straight to building 3D visual prototypes.
So like a visual mock-up of the product, right?
Exactly. And they used those prototypes to get instant feedback from the client, make adjustments on the fly, and just iterate super quickly. Within days, they had a physical prototype made from aluminum.
Wow, that's incredibly fast. So even in design, small batches can speed things up and get to a better result.
Absolutely. And it's not just about physical things either. Imagine trying to implement a new teaching method across an entire school district all at once. It would be almost impossible to measure its effectiveness or make changes if it wasn't working.
But start with a smaller group of students, gather feedback, adjust as needed, then scale up.
Exactly. And there are even platforms like School of One that use technology to create personalized learning plans for each student. Teachers can experiment with different techniques on a smaller scale and see what clicks with each kid.
So this small batches approach can be applied to everything from products you can touch to educational programs. It's all about breaking down complex things and being more iterative and responsive. But what happens when problems do pop up, even with small batches? How do you figure out what went wrong and how to fix it?
That's where the 5 whys comes in. It's so simple, but incredibly powerful for finding the real root of a problem.
Okay, lay it on me. How do the 5 whys work?
It's all about asking why 5 times in a row to dig down to the core issue instead of just addressing the surface stuff.
Like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Exactly. Taiichi Ono, one of the brains behind the Toyota production system, he gives this example of a machine breaking down. Instead of just replacing the broken part, you ask why it broke. Maybe it was overloaded. Why was it overloaded? Maybe another part wasn't working right. Why wasn't that part working? You keep asking why until you find that root cause, which is often a human error or a system issue, not a purely technical one.
So it's about understanding the why behind the problem, not just slapping on a quick fix. But what about in a startup? Give me a real-world example.
Let's take IMVU again. They were getting complaints about a new release. Turned out it had accidentally disabled a feature. They used the 5 whys and found out the root cause wasn't a software bug, it was a training issue. A new engineer hadn't been properly trained on a specific part of the system, which led to a server crashing, which disabled the feature.
So what looked like a tech problem was actually about people and processes.
Exactly. And because they used the 5 whys, they could address the real issue. They created a new training program so everyone had the knowledge they needed.
That's a perfect example of how the 5 whys can lead to real improvements, not just quick fixes. But how do we know how much time and resources to invest based on what we find? We don't want to overreact to every little hiccup.
That's where proportional investment comes in. You invest in a solution that matches the size of the problem. Small investment, big problem. Bigger investment to make sure it doesn't happen again.
So be strategic and make sure those investments make sense. Smart.
Absolutely. And get everyone involved in those 5 whys sessions, everyone connected to the problem.
That reminds me of IG and entertainment. They used the 5 whys to figure out a problem with their content system. Users couldn't post or edit blog entries.
Oh, right. And they did something really interesting. They brought everyone together for the 5 whys, the developers, the content people, everyone. It gave them a complete view of what was going on.
They even figured out that their habit of updating code on Friday nights when traffic was low was actually part of the problem. They were trying to avoid disruptions, but it made it harder to catch bugs early.
Exactly. That detailed breakdown helped them identify the systemic problems and find real solutions. They redesigned their API, improved the user interface, and even changed how they deployed updates. They were optimizing the whole system, not just fixing one bug.
So the 5 whys isn't just about troubleshooting, it's about becoming a more adaptable and resilient organization.
Yeah.
But how do you keep that momentum going? How do you keep growing and innovating?
That's all about understanding your engine of growth. It's about pinpointing what's truly driving sustainable growth for your specific business.
So like, what's fueling the fire and keeping it burning bright?
You got it. There are 4 main engines of growth: word of mouth, side effects of product use, paid acquisition, and repeat purchaser use. Each one has its own quirks and metrics that determine how fast a company can grow.
So like Facebook, with its viral nature, would be driven by word of mouth, While a company like Amazon, with its massive ad budget, might lean more on paid acquisition.
Exactly. And startups really need to focus on mastering one engine of growth at a time. Become an expert in how that specific engine works. Trying to do all four at once usually just leads to confusion and wasted effort.
So pick one, nail it, then maybe think about adding another.
Yeah.
But how do you even choose which engine to focus on first?
It all comes down to your specific business and what you think will create the most sustainable growth. So if you think your product could go viral, maybe prioritize word of mouth. If your customers are super valuable, maybe focus on repeat business.
It's about knowing your business inside and out, making a smart bet on the most effective way to grow.
Exactly. And make sure you're tracking the right metrics for each engine. If you're all about that viral growth, keep an eye on your viral coefficient that tells you how many new customers each existing customer brings in.
So, high viral coefficient your product is spreading like wildfire. Low coefficient, you need to figure out how to make it more contagious.
You got it. And if your chosen engine isn't working the way you hoped, it might be time to try a different one. Just like with building a product, be open to experimenting and changing based on what the numbers tell you.
So engines of growth are about finding that path to sustainable growth. What are some examples of companies that have really nailed this?
Hotmail's a classic example of the power of going viral. They did something so simple but genius. They put a little line at the bottom of every email sent from Hotmail. Get your free email at Hotmail.
So every email was a little ad for them. I love it.
Right. Every email was basically marketing. And because their service was free, it was super easy for new users to sign up. They grew massively without spending big bucks on traditional ads.
That's the dream. But not every product has that built-in virality.
True, but other engines of growth can be just as effective. Think about Tupperware. Their house parties are a classic example of the side effects of product use engine.
Okay, I'm picturing plastic containers and, like, 1950s housewives.
Not far off. Tupperware realized their product, while useful, wasn't exactly exciting on its own. But the social aspect with the house parties where people could try the products, chat about recipes, and connect, that became a huge driver of growth.
So it wasn't just the product, it was the whole experience.
Exactly. And they turned their customers into salespeople. They became brand ambassadors, spreading the word and hosting their own parties.
That's brilliant. They created a whole community, and that community fueled their growth.
Right. And it's still relevant today. Companies like Pampered Chef and Tastefully Simple use a similar approach.
So that's word of mouth, and using those side effects. What about repeat business?
That's a huge one for businesses with products people use regularly. Think subscription services or everyday items.
Netflix and Dollar Shave Club. You sign up, and you're hooked.
Precisely. The key here is customer retention. You want people to love what you offer and stick around.
So it's not just about getting them in the door, but building those long-term relationships.
Exactly. And finally, there's paid acquisition, which is all about using advertising and marketing to get new customers.
That's the one most companies are probably familiar with, right?
Probably. But even with paid acquisition, you got to be smart, track the right metrics. You want to be laser focused on your cost per acquisition, how much it costs to get one new customer.
And ideally, that cost should be less than your customer lifetime value, right? The total money you expect to make from that customer.
You got it. If it costs you more to get a customer than you'll ever make from them, well, that's not sustainable.
It's about finding that balance, attracting new customers while making sure they're ultimately profitable.
Exactly. And the key to paid acquisition is having a real edge when it comes to making money from those customers. You have to get more value from them than your competitors.
So it's not just about who can spend the most on ads. It's about really knowing your audience and creating something they'll pay for.
Exactly. Constantly test and refine your message, your sales process, your pricing, always working to optimize that cost per acquisition and maximize customer lifetime value.
Managing those engines of growth sounds like a balancing act.
It definitely is, but it's absolutely crucial for any company that wants to grow sustainably. Understand the ins and outs of each engine, focus on the right metrics, and you've got a roadmap for scaling your business and thriving in the long run.
This has been amazing. We've talked about so much validated learning, MVPs, innovation accounting, those engines of growth. But before we wrap up, I'm wondering, how do we actually put all this into practice? It's one thing to understand it, but actually doing it, especially in a big company, can feel kind of overwhelming. What would you say to someone who's excited about these ideas but doesn't know where to start?
That's a really good point. It can definitely feel daunting, especially in those larger, more traditional organizations. The key is to start small, Build momentum. You don't have to change everything overnight. find a project, a specific challenge where the lean startup approach could really make a difference.
So like instead of trying to boil the ocean, find a smaller pond to test the waters.
Exactly. Choose something manageable, where you've got the freedom to experiment and try things out. Then put together a small, dedicated team. People who are genuinely excited about it and willing to embrace this new way of working.
Makes sense. Enthusiasm is contagious. But what about pushback from the higher-ups? How do you get them on board with something that might seem pretty radical, especially if they're used to doing things the old way?
That's where storytelling and results come in. Present your project as an experiment, a low-risk way to explore something new or tackle a tough problem. Emphasize that the goal is to learn and collect data, not to follow a rigid plan.
So be open and honest. This is an experiment, and hey, failure is part of the process.
Exactly. And when you have those early wins, even the small ones, celebrate them. Use them to build confidence and show the value of this approach.
Like planting seeds of change, then nurturing them with proof and excitement. But how do we make sure these changes stick around, become part of the company culture, not just isolated experiments?
That takes buy-in from leadership and a commitment to continuous learning. Leaders need to really get behind this lean startup thing and not just talk about it, but live it. Create a culture that truly encourages experimentation, a culture where it's okay to fail because failure means you're learning.
So it's not enough to just say you support it. You have to walk the walk.
Absolutely. And provide the resources, the training, the support, everything people need to embrace this way of working. It's about building a growth mindset across the whole organization.
It's about making it safe for people to experiment, take risks, and learn from their mistakes. What about the listener who's not a manager? How can they advocate for these principles and make a difference?
Great question. You don't have to be a manager to be a change maker. Start by using these principles in your own work. Look for chances to test your assumptions, collect data, and iterate quickly. Share your successes and, even your failures, what you learn with your team.
Be an internal entrepreneur, right? And advocate for change from within.
Exactly. Lead by example. Show everyone the value of these ideas through your own work and inspire others to get on board.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into the lean startup methodology. We've explored the principles, the practical stuff, and how to build a culture that really embraces all of it. So, as we wrap things up, what's the one big takeaway you want our listener to remember?
The most important thing to remember is this. The lean startup methodology isn't just about tools or techniques. It's a completely different way of thinking about how we build things, products, services, even entire businesses. It's about using data, experimenting, being flexible, and learning as you go.
It's about seeing uncertainty not as a roadblock, but as an opportunity. It's not about blindly following a set of rules. It's about adapting these principles to your specific context, your specific situation, and using them to accelerate your learning and growth. Being obsessed with your customers, using data, and always focusing on delivering value.
You got it. And creating a culture where innovation never stops, where failure is just another chance to learn and grow.
So, to everyone listening, as you start your own journey with innovation, remember, start small, experiment, learn quickly. Don't be afraid to change course if the data tells you to. In today's world, the best advantage you can have is knowing how to adapt and thrive in the face of change.